is, yeah, I'm just drawing from my own notes. Outside is the idea of mercy. So what's the difference? I'll ask you this question. The opposite of justice is injustice. So if I steal your car and you're like, hey, I know you stole my car. I saw you do it. And I admit, yeah, I stole your car, but I'm not giving it back. We would call that unjust, because just would be that you keep what you have to keep. If I wrecked the car, and in the course of doing so, enter into a spiritual discussion with God where I ask for his forgiveness, I come and ask for your forgiveness. I'm like, I stole your car, I wrecked it, please forgive me, I'm poor and I can't afford to repay it. I will work for it and pay you back. And then you say, don't worry about it, I got it covered, God's given me a lot, I'm glad that you've come to know Jesus, you're forgiven your debt. This too is injustice. But there's a difference between the injustice, and the difference is repentance. The only difference in my mind, and maybe more, but to me, justice is what is right and fair. Injustice is in two types: an injustice that results in punishment, or ultimately, or injustice that's wrong, and an injustice that's right. What's the injustice that's right? Because the purpose is this: you and I are in conflict, right? Bear with me for a second, but forget the car. The car doesn't matter. We can agree that. You got two children of God here. That's what matters. How do we get back in relationship? I've done something wrong to you. There are only two ways for that to happen. I make it all right, or you forgive it. I make it all right, and you'll be like, okay, that's fair. I got back what I lost, and now we're cool, so to speak. You turn around and forgive me. Now I feel like even a debt to you for this, and we're cool again. Both of them work, and so both of them result in a restoration of the relationship. Justice is the dessert that
some
governs.
injustices cannot be repaid.
Like, right, but in which case what?
Or that woman's son was murdered.
But who can repay it? God can fix that. He can resurrect somebody, but he doesn't typically do that, right?
Well, the problem with society today, with like what society wants as like justice, like one thing that comes up is like reparations.
Yes.
It's like, well, okay, that would have made sense to me if we did it right after we freed slaves and we gave them money to help them get started or what. But like now, hundreds of years later, when they've had generations to improve their situation, which a lot of families have, but not all did.
Yeah.
So why should people who had nothing to do with slavery pay for people who were never enslaved?
Well, the idea, yeah. So reparations is a word for it, but restitution is the other word we could use. So reparations and restitution are the same. The question, though, is from whom? From the innocent or from the guilty? So if you go back and say, let's take Timmy over here, who is of African descent. He lives in America today, and we're asking this question of reparations. And here's Freddie over here. He's white and Irish descent, and he's in America today. And then we'll say Johnny over there, also white, so broadly European, we don't know. Timmy is African American, so there's some percentage chance, but we would have to go back and run it. Yeah, he's a descendant of slaves in America. It's also possible he's a descendant of immigrants after that. It's also possible he's the descendant of non-slaves. It's also possible that he was a slave owner himself in Africa, or a slave trader. So at some point, if you're African, African descent, do we have to go back and be like, all right, well, let's run the trap lines. Were you selling slaves? Were you a slave, or were you not a slave? And reparations should go to the people who were actually disadvantaged. Because if you pay reparations to an African slave trader, you have done unjustly. And the purpose is justice. If you require from the Irish guy who got called a white N-word when he was over here and was beaten up and disadvantaged, why isn't he paid reparations? Because they treated Irishmen like dogs in different parts of America at the time. Irishmen like dogs. And here's Timmy, like me. So I got both problems. I've got an Irish line where we were treated like dogs. I've got a Scottish line where I've got a record in my house of a bill of sale of a family of slaves to my family 200 years ago, right? So I am the descendant of slave owners. I'm also the descendant of people that were persecuted, okay? So do I pay myself, you know, or do I got to find an African-American guy that I know was mean to this guy and this other guy, and I got to pay him some, and then this guy's got to pay me some. So at the end of the day, the problem is that justice has become unclear. Now, if we could derive all this and say, hey, look, Scotty, you are fairly, and you turn around and say, well, where did your wealth come from? That's the other one. So if it turns out that my family was put in a position, it turns out that the money that's in my family, the little bit, not a little bit, the decent amount that we have, decent enough that we have, isn't from the slave owning side. They were doggone broke by the time it rolled around. It's these Irish furniture salesmen that built the business after being, you know, beat up and accused or whatever else. So the wealth that's in my family is not derivative of this. But do I still have some moral debt because this happened in my past? You know, it depends on whether you hold the children responsible for the sins of the father. And I would say all of those are open to, you could pick a way to do it. But the point is this: if you're going to hold the sons accountable for the sins of the father, then you have to hold the other sons accountable for the sins of the father. So an African-American man whose dad committed some crime, but this guy's all stand up and good to go, are we going to punish him because we put his dad in jail? There's this white kid whose dad was a real jerk and stole money from other people. Are we going to punish him because his dad was a jerk? If you're going to do it to the one, you have to do it to the other. That's the point. If you're not going to do it to one, you're not going to do it to the other. Well, there is an easy solution, a super easy solution, which is treat everybody in accordance with what the deliverance of their will is.
So who's going to be the judge?
We appoint judges, but in what standard are they going to judge? That's the question. So if you assume righteous judges, if you assume good discerning judges, the question is, are the laws righteous? And that's what the debate is. What should the laws be? Or what are the right laws?
Then you get around to the issue: can a person receive justice?
By the way, we just stepped right in. I mean, this. I walked in 2 seconds later. We're in this conversation. I'm not sure how this happened. Yeah, thank you very much.
Waiting for you.
Yeah, this is called an ambush right here.
If a society as a whole is subject to subjective morality, can a person receive justice?
Well, here's my point. I think
what is justice under subjective morality?
Something that even today we're all comfortable with is the idea: how about we treat everybody in according to what they did? Okay, so I'm not going to hold you responsible for what your dad did. I'm not going to hold you responsible for what your uncle did. I'm going to hold you responsible for what you did. Now I'm going to hold your dad responsible for that. Now, there is an open question of this. If your dad was a bank robber and he went and robbed a bunch of banks, and you have your house, all the money that bought your house is robbed bank money from somebody else. Now what's just? Okay, and all the people in the room come and say, we were the depositors from this account. All of the money that's in your house were the down payments for our houses. Literally, we were saving them up in the bank. It was all stolen by your dad, and then your dad gave you the money and you bought your house with it. Now what do you do?
We're moving in. Yeah. Eventually that leads to the old saying that the only reason my family's rich and yours isn't is because my ancestors started stealing long before yours did.
But my question to you is, what do you do in that case? What do you do?
Where do you stop?
I'm asking you what you would do.
I guess you got to get back to the point. What are you doing? And are you profiting?
Say that again. I didn't copy.
What are you personally doing, and are you profiting?
Yeah, but brother, I'm asking you a particular question. I would ask you, in this particular case, what would you do? You, in this case exactly. Not as an analogy.
All right.
What you do in this case.
I personally have a problem with inherited wealth.
Okay.
As did my father.
Okay.
As I get older, I now see why.
Okay. But what would you do?
My greedy self says I'm keeping every penny of it.
Okay.
But my spiritual desires would be, yes, I should try to make restitution.
Okay, so what would you do? You've told me about your desires. Now your will is the judge. It sits in judgment of your competing desires here. To which of the prosecutor, the defender, which of the plaintiff?
I'll answer that question when I'm face to face with that choice.
Here it is.
Right now, I'm putting it off.
Okay, all right. Now the answer to this question is the purpose of restitution. It's the idea of, if this group of people who are characterized, for some reason we keep characterizing people by skin color, even though it's not the best determination in any way. There are other physical characteristics you can pick that are more determined than skin color, but we love doing skin color. This group of people is making this point. We built the house. You're living in it. Our people built it with our labor. You are the one enjoying the fruits of the labor. It's not an illogical, unjust argument. The question is, how do you go about administering justice in it? Now, there's an argument to be made for, hey, all the specifics that you mentioned about who's dad, who's mom, exactly how does this work out, that is going to be so hard to determine that we will judge as a society that it's not going to be, we can't do it. It's just going to be too hard to do. So what we'll do instead is make a broad brush approach to it that says, okay, look, in this group are a bunch of people. You got people who are really, really done over hard. You got some people who didn't, and then here are people who profited by it. Okay, so these are bad people over here, and if we go and shower money on all this, then these people really, really deserved it and should get it, and that's good. These people probably deserved it a little bit. These people absolutely shouldn't. So you're going to get 20% injustice and 80% justice, and that's good. Let's do that, especially if it's with tax money that nobody cares about. This is the argument, right? That's the idea. When I say nobody cares about, I mean that colloquially, like it doesn't, it's like trillions of dollars in there. So this is the argument. This is a good argument. Okay, the argument for the argument for restitution is not a bad argument. The problem is we're only arguing, in my opinion, that's not the problem. There are lots of problems. There's problems in drug directions. One of the problems is we're only doing it for one group. It's not the only disadvantaged group the whole time, right? And if we're going to go and count ourselves by our disadvantages, then why not take people who are at natural disadvantages, like disabled people, and do a lot more for them? And why not take people who have voluntarily disadvantaged themselves, like veterans, and do more for them? People who are involuntarily disadvantaged, you should do more for than people who voluntarily disadvantage themselves, possibly. Right? There's a good reason for that, because it wasn't their choice to do so. It was the other people, you're like, yeah, that was your choice. So I think that there's merit in discussing this. I think there may be even merit in doing something about it. Let me tell you why I don't think we should be having this discussion at all. And it's the same reason that we shouldn't be arguing over the welfare system. Because right now there are some reports that people who are on some sort of government program are making more money than people who are not on government programs and working full-time jobs at minimum wage and above. So a lot of people have problems with this, because you're saying, hey, societally this isn't helping, because we're encouraging people, we're motivating people economically to not work if they're already going to be in that band of minimum wage kind of stuff. In my limited opinion, if the church in America, if half of the people who claim to be Christians in America were Christians, and we took very seriously Christ's injunctions of like basically how we should share wealth, basically how much we should do for the poor, the sick, the imprisoned, etc. If we treated people in each one of those cases like this, if our generosity was as great as the Bible asks us to make it, if it was half as great as that, the only people who would be in need are people who obviously shouldn't be helped. Everybody who was in need, who had even a modicum of goodness, and Paul says if a man won't work, don't let him eat. So it's not just like shower money on anybody who's unfortunate. You have to do a little bit of work with them. This is why I don't give money to the guys holding signs at the road. Those guys, 90% of them are hustlers. And so if you want to know who deserves wealth, you have to dive into the homeless community and the poor communities and learn who's actually in need and who is a hustler. And even the hustlers are not all bad guys. Some of them learned to hustle because they were not presented with very many options, and they took one of the options, and they can probably be encouraged out of that. So you don't write them off completely. But the idea is, if we as a Christian nation were as Christian as we claim to be in our heads, this would not be an argument. This would not be a discussion. But because we grasp and hold onto what we have, people are like, if you will grasp it and I think that some of it's mine, then I will tear it from your fingers if you can't, if you don't give it to me yourself. And this is a source of conflict. So I'm no liberal. I think think probably most people know I'm happy to say that most of my principles are conservative in nature. But I am very much unhappy with the way that the church does, the church, not Reston Bible Church, but the church in America does. I'll be a little unhappy with how Reston Bible Church does it. We have federalized giving. When we give money, we give it to the general fund. Who is this general of whom we speak? I didn't know we were in the military. No, not general rank. General Campbell is in charge of dispensing that. But that's basically what happens. We got a board of guys who are like, this is a worthy cause, this is a worthy cause, this is a worthy cause. If you put a gun to all of our heads and said, to whom does Reston Bible Church give their money? You might know a few of the missionaries, but I said, where does the general fund go? Outside of administration. When we do charity work here, to whom does it go? Most of us would be hard put to give an answer, including me. There's something very important about taking your money and looking another human being in the face and giving your money to that human being. When a church gives money to somebody, that is good in that people are like, it's because of the Church of Jesus that this money has come to me. There's a benefit to that. But an even greater one is when you, as a Christian, go to Timmy and you're like, this money I'm giving you in the name of Jesus because I'm a steward, I'm not an owner, and I am giving his money to you to help you out. You are now a steward of his money too, so do worthily with it. That is going to tell me that's not a powerful tool for the reshaping of society in a God-directed way that materially benefits the people who are in need and benefits the person who's doing charity. You want a system that'll work better than what we got? Try that one right there. But until the Christians can look me in the face and say, that's how I do it, my answer back to him is, I don't particularly care about your opinion on social welfare. Nor should you care too much about mine. Okay, that wasn't the topic, but that was a great one that we've been talking about. It was a topic we are now talking about. Do you have any further comments or questions? That was my opinion. I'm just giving my opinion. Okay, this is where we got last week with what the answer was to this question. So the broad topic that we've been talking about is for social issues, where social issues, we had not talked about reparations as a social issue, but for social issues. Now, I think we could pull this topic into here as well. And by the way, I'm not sure what your views are on inherited wealth, but I bet some of the downsides of inherited wealth are also the downsides of what we call helicopter money, where you just show overhead and you sprinkle money down like it's going to solve the problem. The worst thing in the world you can do, not the worst, that's not true. It is not a good thing to hand somebody that you haven't taught what to do with a tool that can harm them, a powerful tool. You don't give a kid a power tool, and you don't hand a child there's a reason that when you have rich kids that inherit a bunch of money because their parents died or whatever else, Batman's parents get shot, what happens to all the money? There's a trustee out there, because what we said is, for heaven's sakes, don't give a kid $10 million, because he will have, in short order, 550 million lollipops being delivered in a dump truck. So in the same way, you don't want to give anybody who hasn't managed money a bunch of money to then just do something with, because you're not doing them any favors. You will do them favors over the short term, but you see this happen with lottery winners. And this is why, at least according to some studies, the majority of lottery winners say things like they wish they had not won the lottery, because the millions that they won were not adequate compensation for the hate and discontent that it brought them. So same is true everywhere. And that's not a reason not to give somebody money. It just means that when you give somebody money, you need to teach them how to use it at the same time. What that typically means is you don't back up the truck and dump it out. You turn around and you work your way up to it. You crawl, walk, run. Okay. So that aside, what is your justification? Our question was for the objective, the person who believes or knows, they understands that they believe in objective morals. They know the chain, and they know where rights are determined. For the person who's a subjectivist and say, it is not your right to tell me how to live my life. We have now shown why their argument is circular. That is to say, they say, you should not tell me how to live my life. Nobody should, and that is because of a general principle, which is one person should not tell another person how they should live their life or what their morals should be. But when your closest friend, whom you love most dearly, is caught in the throes of heroin addiction, you will yourself go to great lengths to restrict their freedom and redirect their will for the purposes of moving out in accordance with what you think will make them happier. So this is self-contradictory, because the principle of I believe it is right to interfere with somebody's choice contradicts the earlier statement of nobody has the right to interfere with anybody else's choice. That's the point right there. And when we ask specifically what was the justification for doing so, the justification was down to basically some form of happiness, well-being, or contentment, where what you're saying is the person about whom I love's judgment on this is wrong or impaired, and because of that wrongness or impairment, and because my judgment of how to make them happy, I judge to be greater, I am, in the name of their happiness, I'm going to interfere in their choices in their life. That's the justification that people have to end up giving in the long run. So if that turns out to be the case, if that is all right, is that a general solution that is applicable to all of the different social ills that we're talking about, against which there is a quote-unquote Christian position, and then there is a quote-unquote socially derived morality from it? Yes, sir.
So we get to this place, we sort of determine that this is the objective. Objectively, this is what we should do. But when you talk about justification, it's extremely subjective. I mean, and even entering in, and this is what I had from last week, even entering in to decide to help your friend, you have to decide, is it the right thing to do? You know, will it be effective? I mean, if I pull the needle out today, is it just going to stick it back in the mouth? Is it something that I ought to do? You know, will it be effective? And then, am I the one who should do it? And lastly, really, and both of those are pretty subjective of you figuring all this out. And the last thing is, does God want me to intervene in this instance, which is also, as far as you know, subjective. I mean, God wants what he wants, but you got to figure it. I mean, you know, even if an angel comes and says this to you, we say objective, but when you really get down to it, because it's us, it's all subjective.
Well, what you can say is we subjectively know objective truths. So that, how do we know that our subjective understanding of what's an objective truth is accurate, right? Right. So you've asked a couple of interesting questions here. Let me answer two of them, and then we'll continue discussion in whatever way seems best to you. So on the one hand, what you have pointed out is, okay, so even if it's subjective, or even if the person who believes in objective morals has a subjective epistemology that causes it to be questionable whether their understanding is right, you'll remember that this is exactly the reason that we spent a year almost in going through, driving this all the way down to first principles so that we can make arguments that are based as much as possible in necessity and in deductive reasoning so that we can come to what these objective truths would be. And in the course of doing so, you may recall that we talked about love quickly emerges as the highest ethic because there are necessary relationships between the concept of love and the concept of good that cause us at the end of the day to make this one statement: whatever it is that I want done for me, I ought to want done for other people. Because if you have a system of 3 people or 4 people or 10 people where you adopt that ethic, your desires for what happens to you emerge naturally. Whereas any system other than that results in stuff that you would call unhappiness. So for sheer pragmatic laws of physics, basically, laws of metaphysics, drive you to force you to accept love if you say what you want is your own well-being and good. So that was not that was a summary of a longer argument that we made, but you remember that we made that. So now what you should say to the subjectivist is now stuck, right? We left them alone, stuck with a contradiction. Okay, so now the subjectivist should say this: all right, I accept that what I'm saying is self-contradictory. So what we are in agreement, though, and you say, okay, but subjectivist, I don't think that you're wrong about the happiness of your friend. I think we can both measure with data the fact that your friend on heroin is less happy, even according to themselves, than your friend not on heroin in otherwise similar circumstances. And so if we are agreed on that one, now the question is basically, without putting too much of a finer point on it, why are you wrong? And what they should say is, I see that there's an objective benefit. Despite what my belief that people ought to be able to do whatever they want because that makes them happy, turns out that whatever people want to do doesn't make them happy. Only certain things that people sometimes want to do actually make them happier than other things, right? Even if you use happiness comparatively. So that should lead you to think, okay, well then possibly there are multiple ways to be happier than there are to be sad. And it may be the case, though, that there's one way to be the happiest. So what we ought to ask the question is, are you interested in being miserable? No. Are you interested in being happy? Yes. Are you interested in being happier? Yes. Are you interested in being as happy as you can possibly be? It seems to me that the answer to that probably ought to be yes, right? Where we would rather be happier than not happy, and so we ought to want to be happiest. So is there a course of action, a general course of action that makes everybody the happiest? Now let's say that we disagree on that. Too many different people, too many different personalities. What's going to make you happiest is going to be different from what's going to make you happiest. And at a minimum, in your own lives, surely it has to work out that way. Unless the solution of everybody being happiest is everybody wear exactly the same clothes, live in exactly the same house, do exactly the same thing, etc. That seems to not work on account of even personality differences, etc. And at a minimum, if one of the things that can make you happiness is an expression of athletic skill, then this guy is going to be better probably at a number of sports than I am going to be. And so as a result, perhaps my happiness is impacted by that. Okay? So it seems like there's a case for individual custom happiest action plans for yourself for the future. All right, so let's say, all that aside, or including all that you and the subjectivist agree. People ought to be as happy as they can possibly be. And I see that not all courses lead you to the happiest possible outcome. So what course or courses lead us to the happiest possible outcome? This is an engineering question. And I'll take a brief statement on, but I'll stop right here and put a pin in it. This is a question of engineering. This is a systems process engineering question. It can be seen as a systems process engineering question. There are a desired outcome. Here are a bunch of resources. What's the process that makes us happiest possible thing? There are other ways of looking at it, but we'll start with that one. Ashley.
In the last 2 weeks, you touched on your definition of happy, and you talked about it a little bit ago.
Yeah, I'm leaving it intentionally general at this point. We'll neck down on happiness in a second, but that's a good point. Don't lose that one, so let's put a pin in that.
I think the subjectivist would avoid the contradiction and say that there might be a behavior contradiction, that I might act as if I think the other person's happiness is better, but what I should do is be less judgmental and more accepting of other people's lifestyles, but I'm just acting from my primitive brain, that I might behaviorally contradict that, but I shouldn't.
Well, then we would take them to the data and say, well, the data, if you believe in science, if you believe in empiricism, the empirical data suggests strongly that there's a multiple factor increase in reported happiness of the individual when they're not in the throes of addiction than those who are. And especially when they rate their own judgment about that time. So the retroactive judgment of the own individual themselves says this: at the time, I thought this was what I wanted. I realize now that that was negatively impacting my happiness, and the reason that I was not happy was because of this behavior, therefore I'm better off without it.
Right, but they would imagine a hypothetical person that even if 99% say that they were not happy, if one person was actually happy, like, they have to presume that the person acting.
We're not saying they're not happy, we're saying happiest. Happier than they could be in other situations. So I'm not saying they can't be happy. The heroin addict can be happy. I'm just saying they can be much happier by not being.
I think they would just reject the idea of levels of happiness because it would imply like a hierarchy of happiness.
Well, they can't reject levels of happiness because they themselves both believe in differential levels of happiness in virtue of the fact that they said themselves that they would have interfered with their buddy on the justification.
That they would interfere because they're just emotionally reacting, and that's not what they should do, even if they contradict it.
I'm saying that they said themselves, not that what they should do. They said themselves, this will make him happier than that. So they recognize that there's a happiness differential. Otherwise, they wouldn't act it. They wouldn't even have the logic chain in the first place.
Right, but they would just say that that's their own shortcoming.
Okay, well, the point is, though, that they're being both illogical and anti-scientific on their own lights. And I would say that's enough to refute the argument.
When you start interjecting time into this process, that's when things really get complicated. Because generally what happens, my future expectations of short-term pleasure far exceed my expectations for long-term pleasure.
Yes.
So I'm going to get, I mean, that happens over and over and over. If I'm faced with a situation, I'm going to look at what's the situation right now, and am I going to get more happiness if I do one course of action right now, which far exceeds my happiness in the future. For example, going to war, World War II. People didn't want to go to war because they knew right now what the price would have to be paid. But they knew in the future that maybe this is going to get all sorted out. And a lot of people were voting for let's stay out of war. And some people said, no, we got to deal with this issue. But that's essentially life's question. Do we opt for short-term pleasure in exchange for long-term happiness?
So,
Isn't that the question of theology? Do I opt for myself now versus what is promised and the hope I have for future?
so the reason this, I don't think we should
That's essential man's question.
I know. Well, I don't think we should have to ask this question. The reason we shouldn't have to ask this question very much anymore is all of the data indicate only one answer to that. There are, in broad terms, short-term pain for long-term gain is the rule of this planet, and maybe the physical universe, and maybe the metaphysical universe. But we all know this. Education is not short-term pain; it's 12 years of pain for long-term gain.
Isn't that the argument for Christianity?
Physical fitness let me avoid religion entirely.
All right.
Physical fitness, short-term pain, long-term gain. Investment, you want to become rich? No point is the way to becoming rich. Spend your money now on everything that you want to do. Make yourself happy in the immediate future. That does not work. The data are in, and thousands of years of data are in. That's not how you do it. There is no situation in a physical universe where matter and energy are conserved, where, and even arguably in a metaphysical universe, where short-term pain is endured, and it needn't be pain. It could be restriction. It could be, slight self-control. It could be, mild forms of this. Don't end up leading to something that is better. In fact, this is an intelligence test that they do with kids. Not as an intelligence test, a type of intelligence, not necessarily a process of intelligence. It is a self-discipline test they do with kids, where they put them in a room and they say, here's this young child, put him in front of a room, you put a marshmallow in front of him, and you say, and I forget the time scale, but it's like a minute, maybe something like that. I'm going to leave you in the room with this marshmallow. You can eat the marshmallow if you want, but if not, if you don't eat the marshmallow for 1 minute, I'll come back in and I'll give you 2 marshmallows. And a number of the kids, the second you leave the room, are like, marshmallow gone. And then some of the kids will turn around and wait for the second marshmallow. And they do get 2 marshmallows. This isn't one of those many things where I still don't understand how we get away doing this through a human subjects committee, but where we basically torture children in the name of science. Where we actually give them the marshmallow this time. So that turns out to be an incredible predictor for success in this world. The child who can self-impose control over their immediate desires almost always turns out with what we like to measure as objectively better metrics longer term in life. This ability to deny the immediate impulse is very important. Anybody who's ever been enraged knows that's true. Anybody who's ever been highly infatuated with somebody who's not a good person knows that's true. Okay, we shouldn't even discuss this. This should be an uncontestable, obvious to anybody who's attempting to even remotely pretend to be open to the truth. This is a law that short-term pain is endured for long-term gain, or short-term sacrifice or self-denial for long-term objectives is a way to greater forms of happiness that you yourself assess. Do you want marshmallows? Yes. Do you understand if you can just wait 60 doggone seconds, you can have twice as many marshmallows as if you have it now? Yes. I understand it. I'm leaving. I'm eating the marshmallow. Right? Doesn't work out. You asked the kid who waited a minute, which kid's happier? Put the kids next to each other. See who's happier. All right? Kid A watches this happen to Kid B. Kid B gets 2 sets of marshmallows. Kid A is now incredibly unhappy, probably crying. right? This is incontestable. So I don't even want to debate this one. I'm going to just put that up there as law. If you want to fight it, go bring the literature on this one. But given that we're going to say, absolutely the case, that in this world, you're going to go with a short-term sacrifice for a long-term gain. The question is, what sacrifices should we make in the short term, pointed at what gain? Because here's the other problem, and this is also a law, is that we seem to assume of like, okay, great, it's about marshmallows. I'm going to go get a bunch of marshmallows. What happens if you give a kid a whole bag of marshmallows? They will eat it, and then what happens 5 minutes later? They're miserable. They're either at the point of vomiting, or they feel so sick that they're unhappy. And so do you just do what the Buddhists say of like walk the middle path, eightfold way, eight noble truths? Do what's average and you'll be happy? Maybe. That's better than the extremes. But is that truly the end that we desire? And as you point out, injecting time into the process. So the smart aleck philosophical response to this is processes are time dependent, and so you cannot inject time into a process. Time is necessarily part of a process if it's a process in the first place, because it's changed from state A to state B. But the question you're asking specifically is, what's the time scale that matters here? Are we talking about the next 5 minutes? Are we talking about the next 5 months? Are we talking about the next 5 years? What's the time scale? And your objectives do depend on that. There are certain forms of wealth that are built over generations. There are certain forms of wealth that can be built in weeks, depending on how it goes, but they can also be lost in days. And sometimes they can be lost in weeks or days. So things that are that volatile tend to be volatile in both directions, to things that are stable tend to be stable in both directions.
Could you make a generalization that desires of the flesh are generally short-term gain?
Yes, but I'm still trying to avoid religious talk on this one for generalized principles that the seculum would recognize as well. Oh, sorry, yeah. He's out of my principal visual. You're in the rods, not the cones portion of the eyeball. Sorry.
No, this might be farther down the line.
Thank you, Chris.
I think there's probably some point where you have to limit the happiness of perhaps someone who has a warped sense of what makes them happy.
Yes.
For the sake of a greater good.
Which we do, right? What happens when we find psychopaths who like eating people?
Yeah.
We throw them in jail
Right.
for a very long time, right?
But doesn't that go against sort of one of your earlier maxims that we're trying to increase happiness for all people, like for each one?
No, the reason, absolutely not. It's the kind of thing I would use as evidence to people that didn't believe in that. If the subjectivist says, no, we should let everybody be happy. Okay, then let the psychopath run around and kill people.
Right.
What's your argument against that? And their argument is, well, if you take society as a whole, these 7 people that he would kill are now less happy than they would be if they weren't killed. So for that reason, for the total integration on the curve of total happiness for society, we're going to take these measures.
And that's a separate argument, that then we have to maximize happiness for the most people over the most time, as opposed to for each individual person.
Right. So which brings up an important question, which is, what is who brought up the point of the practical of how do you do this? Practically speaking, do you do this by treating individuals each according to their lights, or do you do it in a societal form where you say the needs of the total integration on the curve of happiness? Which one actually turns out to be the one that maximizes that the most? There's a whole debate on that one, right? And you've got people who are like, no step on neck, don't tread on me, complete individual freedom, all the way down to if you're not doing this in a commune, you're not getting the point. This is the only way that it works. Interestingly, who sits on both sides of this camp? Christianity. Because where did the term, by the way, that Karl Marx pulls up from each according to his ability to each according to his need? He got that from the New Testament, right? He didn't write that one. That was how the early church lived, like a bunch of commies. But over here on the individual side, it's don't hold the son for sins according that his father committed, kind of thing. And God holds us individually responsible for all these things. And Paul says things like, this person, if this person has done this, then they should pay this penalty. You go to your brother if they sin, and you do 2 witnesses, and then the church, and then kick them out. This is individual action. So Christianity sits on both sides, but I think there's the reason for that, and I'll short circuit this maybe to say the answer to how do you do this, the best possible form of governance is a commune where everybody in it is completely good and just.
60s all over again.
Well, not the 60s, because the 60s,
Where are you finding this?
the 60s threw away, but listen, I'll make the argument. The 60s threw away all of the objective standards. And this is what this whole question is going to, is what are the actual objective standards that you and the subjectivists have now agreed that it appears to be the case that there's almost law out there as to what will make you happier than you would otherwise be. If we scientifically studied these things and said, what are the things that make us happier and sadder? It turns out that if you, as an individual, hold to accurate truths about what is just and good, and the society is made of people who all agreed to this standard and agreed to act to it, on penalty of being thrown out of that society, what you end up with is the church. The church is the group of people who are self-governed because they're all obedient to what turns out to be the right way to do this, are the laws of God. God's laws are not laws because he capriciously decided, like, I'd like people not to covet. It just seems like it would be a good idea. I like, murder or not murder. The dice say not murder today. We'll pick that one, right? That's not what he did. What God knows, because he is love, is what love requires you to do. And the Ten Commandments are the basics, like, you guys are so messed up, let's just start with some basic stuff. No killing each other and stealing each other's stuff, okay? Can we start there? We'll get towards generosity and grace and charity later. In the immediate near term, stop killing each other. And then we'll work our way there, right? The law was not intended to be, this is the way to live, until it got to what? What's the law on which they all hang? What's the law on which they're all based? Which is? Love. The law of love is do unto others as you have them do unto yourself. So all of the Ten Commandments are easy. If you do to God what he deserves and you do to others what you would want them to do to you, all of these things you'll automatically do. So if you have a society of a bunch of commies that actually did that, that would work well. What's the problem with communism? Why does capitalism work so well? Capitalism has lifted more, this is true, the conservatives say it all the time, capitalism has lifted more people out of poverty than any other system of human governance in the past. Why does it work?
Because it assumes people are behaviors.
It makes the assumption that people are greedy. And it turns out that the communism assumption makes the assumption that people are good. And the problem is, the economic test turns out to slide to highly support that greedy is what most people are. But in a good church, what you see are the kinds of things that cause the happiness level to rise well above the average. Okay, Michael, and then we'll go back to the main point.
So well and good. You're having a conversation with your friend. You agree that it's like subjective turtles all the way down?
Yes. Yes. Very good question, young man, but it turns out turtles all the way down. Who said that? I forgot who. That was a great question.
It's been around for a while. But then what happens when they have this libertarian agnostic approach where it's you can't know the best possible solution, so the best thing to do is to create a society which places the least restrictions on freedoms and let people individually try to sort it out themselves.
That exact claim is the whole reason that I did this. Because what I'm trying to say to the person is you don't believe that's true. Because if you believe that's true, so talking about what you should do to society is a nice antiseptic way of doing things, because you can change all these things mentally and it doesn't have too much emotional impact on you. When someone turns around and is like, stop, I don't want to talk about society. I want to talk, who do you love? Who's the one person in this world that you love the most? If I went and grabbed that person, took him off and killed him, would upset you the most, right? Who's that person? Not counting yourself. Who's that person? Now, if that person's on heroin, what would you do? And it turns out that they will reject their own theories about what to do when it comes to somebody that they love. And then you turn around and say, don't you think we should have, in the best possible society, a society in which we all love each other as much as we love ourselves, as much as we love our dearest friend? Then why would you even talk about treating people in society differently than you talk about treating your dearest friend? Only if you're interested in there not being love in society, right? And if that's the case, then I'm not really interested in talking to you because I want a society of people who want to love. So if you yourself believe that's the case, then let's talk about a society where that has that same love relationship that you have with your dearest person or friend. And show me the person that'll reject that.
But they would still turn around and say, well, if it was my wife, if it was my best friend, I would still help them. But that's because that's what I think is best, but I can't impose that.
But you are imposing it.
Culture.
No, but you're imposing it on your wife.
But because that's their immediate sphere of influence.
So what? The point is the principle. Why? The question is, can you know what's right for the person, the other person? And you've already answered the question in virtue of having a recommendation for what to do. If you run into a person where they're like, I genuinely wouldn't know what to do because I don't know how to differentially judge happiness, I could be completely wrong about it. Okay, now you're a little bit stuck in your argument with that person, but then I would turn around and say, okay, do you love your wife as much as you love yourself? And if the person's like, well, let's call it even, at best, then I would say, why are you not on heroin right now? Right? If she's having a grand time on heroin, why aren't you doing it? What's the person going to say? Eventually, they're going to say, I think, if you're rhetorically and logically skilled enough and they're willing to continue the conversation, they're going to come back to the point of, I judge myself to be happier not on heroin. Okay, why? And they're going to come up with a list of reasons why. Then you're going to ask, why is that list of reasons not applicable to their wife? And it obviously is, because they already said that they wouldn't want to. So they're thinking of their wife like they think of themselves. And I'm like, yes, that's called love. Congratulations, you've discovered love. You're now treating your wife like you would want to treat yourself. We're there. And if you've got a better ethic than love, tell me about it. But as of now, love's the best, and nobody knows of anything better.
Well, if you say something's objectively wrong, and you still do it, are you saying you think it's wrong and you think it's okay because you're doing it?
I didn't follow that. If I say,
right, if you think robbing or if you think stealing is wrong, and you end up being in a situation where you're tempted and you steal, are you thinking that it's wrong and you think that it's okay at the same time?
no, I think if you ask me, if the person believes that it's wrong to steal, and then they steal, they would then logically be forced to make the statement, I did what is wrong. If they said, I didn't do what was wrong, then it's not the case that they believe that stealing is wrong.
Right, and I think the subjectivist would turn around and say, I believe judging people is wrong, and sometimes I judge people.
Okay, but I would say, why do you think judging people is wrong?
Because it's putting yourself in authority over them.
No, I didn't say you were forcing them to do it. Right now you're making a judgment. I think this is better than
A
that.
form of thinking that I'm better than someone else.
No, I didn't say you said you were better than somebody else. You could be judging yourself. You could say, I think that I'm wrong when I do this. That's not a better or worse thing.
Right, but they would separate self from other people.
Right, but let's say it's just self. So you're making a judgment in the case of yourself. So it's not wrong to judge.
Okay.
You're saying, so it's wrong to judge others. So, all right, it's wrong to judge others. Why do you think it's wrong to judge others? Do you think it's wrong to judge Hitler? Well, who am I to say? Maybe killing 6 million Jews is perfectly fine.
Right, but they would say people that would interfere with other people's happiness is wrong. Therefore, anyone displaying intolerance is wrong.
Okay? Anyone who's displaying intolerance is wrong. So Hitler's wrong because he was intolerant. But if he killed himself, that would be okay. Okay? So are we judging Hitler based on what he did for himself, or are we judging Hitler on what he did for other people?
Other people.
Okay, so now we've at least agreed that judgment is okay. Now it's a restricted form of judgment that's not okay. Now I can't judge what other people do. And then I'm right back to the argument we've been making the whole time. But you would in the case of your loved one.
No, they would say I would be wrong to do so, but I might still do it.
So then why are you still doing it?
Because I haven't been enlightened enough.
But yet you still do it, so why not enlighten yourself? Are you telling me now that you pointed this all out, if you found your
No,
loved one
it's the
hooked
same
on
way
heroin?
the person thinks it's wrong to steal, but they still steal.
I'm saying, yeah, but here's my question. Are you saying that now that you have thought through this, if you saw the person who was in the throes of heroin, are you saying you would not no longer, you've now agreed, I won't do it?
They would say I don't know until I'm in that situation.
Okay?
The same way someone who says it's wrong to steal, but if I'm tempted enough, I might do it.
So if people say that, I don't think they're being intellectually honest.
I think they are.
Well, I'm telling you, I don't think that they are. And the reason I don't think that they are is they act neither in their own lives, they never act on that principle.
But the same way that a Christian doesn't act sinlessly.
And that's called hypocrisy, and nobody thinks hypocrisy is okay. Presumably, even this person would say hypocrisy is not okay.
Okay, and they say sometimes I'm a hypocrite, but that doesn't mean it's
Do you think it's good to be a hypocrite, or do you think it's not good to be a hypocrite? I would say that to this person. Presumably, they'd say it's not good to be a hypocrite, which you say now your thinking is illogical. So ultimately, at a minimum, if what you say is, what do you think is right at all? Is it right to think logically? And if it is, then why are you acting in a way that's self-contradictory? I take it back to self-contradiction. If they think it's down to morality, I'd ask them why their morality only varies in the cases where they have their own contradiction. If it's about interior to exterior, people in group and out group, I'd ask them why it varies across that border. So the bottom line is you're pointing out contradictions in here. The person can throw up contradictions all they want, but at the end of the day, you could keep a contradiction scoreboard and say your own worldview contains X amounts of contradictions. This worldview contains 0 contradictions. If you're claiming that logic is important, then why are you accepting a worldview that has a bunch of contradictions rather than a worldview that doesn't have any contradictions?
I think where you guys are talking here, I mean, I don't see a way for being subjective to be intellectually honest. I mean, you're always going to get to the point where you say you're being intellectually dishonest.
Yes, that's right. But intellectually dishonest means something. What it means is you're saying A is true, and you're also saying not A is true. So at the end of the day, all of what we're doing here is a logical process. And the only way you know whether a logical process is not correct is whether it can, not the only way, the principal way of knowing it is if it contains a contradiction. And so if you show the person's thinking to be contradictory, or they show their own thinking to be contradictory, that's the end of the game. There isn't a further that you can go. So you either have to abandon logic or you have to accept the logic. So if the person's going to abandon logic, which people do frequently, at least you're making them aware of the fact that they're acting illogically. And so when they turn around and they claim, I'm doing what's logically the case, you're like, that's not what you said. You said that you were doing something that was not logical, and here was the evidence of it.
I had a conversation with some folks, kind of pressing some of the things that I don't want to bring about as a little one here, but about Germany and saying, hey, 1930, 40
Yes,
Germany.
yes.
And they said, is that wrong? And they were like, I don't know. And I pressed like every, and
Right.
they said, well, maybe in the future we'll find out that there's something that we didn't understand, or like I could not get. I went home and I called my
I was like, I found the guy. I found the guy that thinks this is the case. So remember, by the way, as odd as that seems to us here in modern America today, a Nazi apologist, there are still actual Nazis today out there, right? So there are people out there who are like, nah, we just didn't finish. You're like, are you serious? Like, the rest of the world thinks of that's the worst possible thing. Like, Nazi is the biggest insult we can throw at somebody nowadays. And it's, people in the U.S. were nothing. We were not clean on a lot of this stuff. The eugenics and the mobile gas chamber. Mobile gas chamber was Mengele came over here and saw some of what was going on in America and was like, I'm gonna take some of these ideas back. And then he ramped them up, and Zyklon beat his way to the Holocaust. But it was not that. The idea of mobile labs moving around America to help us deal with the end-of-life people who shouldn't be around anymore were already being tossed up, right? So, yeah. So, and that the concept was out there. But my point is, like, as much of it abhorrence as it is to us today, there are still people today who are like, we should do more of that.
Well, these wouldn't fall in the camp of those kinds of people. They were just more of, they didn't want to pick an absolute.
I got it, but Steve, this is where I would go back to, like, you have to do the hard work of talking through it if you want them to see the light on this one. And remember, tactically speaking, people don't see the light during the discussion. They just don't. It's when they sit there and they will fight you tooth and nail to the point where you're like, what is wrong with you? It's black and white. This is black and this is white. And the person's like, I don't know, maybe the person's got fuzzy vision. And the inner portion of it's a little bit gray to them. I'm like, if they walk up closer, they'll see it's black and white. They'll be like, what if they can't walk up closer because they're in a wheelchair? I'll be like, I'm about to lose my mind. At the end of the day, when they go back home and they think about it and they sleep on it, sometimes they come back to you and you're like, okay, you were right about this the other day. And you're like, then why did you make me take 30 minutes to do it? Right? Sometimes they just never get the point. But if you're interested in doing the hard work of getting there, what you have to do is understand what it is you're shooting for. And what you're shooting for is in a place that this works in America, in post-Enlightenment America and Europe, where the agreed upon basis for logic, at least in name, for how to think rightly, at least in name, is according to the principles of logic. And I will add to that, with evidence that's typically defaults towards scientific, whatever scientific evidence is. Somehow scientific evidence and good reasoning are the ways that we should do everything. Now we can debate about what those are, but ultimately logic and empirically derived truths and sound metaphysical principles are the triangle of truth, so to speak, in the Western world. So you should be, people are educationally predisposed to at least give verbal credence to that set of assumptions. Turns out we're all really bad at it because we never train anybody, either in primary school or in secondary education. When we do teach it in secondary education, we do such a jacked up job of it that we leave people more confused about the issues than when they came in the first place. But that triangle, people at least think is the right thing to do. So if you say, do you believe in logic? Yes. Do you believe in science? Yes. Are these the ways that we should govern our lives? Yes. Okay. According to your own principles, what you have said here is false. And this is what I'm intending to do in the debate. There's no way that John's going to walk out of that thing and be like, I saw the light. This is it. This was a compelling logical case, and it was well reasoned and scientifically evidentially based. God willing, it will be both, but that won't be enough. So at the end of the day, you have to present it, hopefully for the purposes of other people in the room.
I think in that case, a lot of people end up being like hardcore consequentialists, where it's even if Thanos like wipes out half the population, if like the world in which he didn't do that, like that's an environmental crisis that leads to extinction, wiping out the population avoids that future, like the ends justify any means.
Yeah, with your permission, two notes really quickly here. We have to be out of this room at 10:15. Is that today? I think it's today. Because they're going to come set up. They got a big setup to do for the next thing. I will add to that the church is open to us the possibility, if we want, to come as much earlier to this class as we want. They will open up the church wherever we want. So I am agnostic about it, but I put that out to y'all. If there's a will of the people thing that we want to do that, we can do that. But bottom line is, at least today, we're going to end at 10. Somebody clock me, and let's end at 10:12 and walk rigorously at 10:12. Somebody start throwing stuff at 10:12. Okay, and then the second point was, so the severe consequentialist. I want to take a quick Marvel detour here because I actually think that this is good intellectual material. Who's the opposite of Thanos? Philosophically, in the Marvel universe, now I don't know how many Marvel universe guys and gals there are out there, they're approaching uncountable. Who's the opposite? If he's the villain, who's the truest hero?
They only care about the memes.
Captain America is the opposite of Thanos. Thanos is, as you say, the consequentialist. What are the ends justify the means, right? Because remember what he says to, what's the girl? Gamora. Gamora? Yeah. What he says to her is, your planet is now a thriving world. Every belly is full. When I showed up, people were starving. I did this. Hard thing to do. Now everybody is happy. So don't tell me I did what's evil. If what you care about is the happiness of other people, then this is the way that it works. What's Captain America's attitude? We only do what's right, and basically what he doesn't say, he only makes one reference to God the entire time. Anybody remember what it is? I'd set this one out, Cap. These guys are basically gods. There's only one God, ma'am, and I'm pretty sure he doesn't dress like that. So, but behind the whole thing is this obvious, is an unspoken idea because they won't do it today. Captain America believes in God. And his reason for taking individual action is he thinks that his individual good is superintended by a God who has a plan that pulls these goods into the ultimate good that he wants. By the way, if you want to know what we're Captain America in the Marvel Universe. Christians are supposed to be Captain America. All right? And we're supposed to fight the Thanoses out there who believe that they can get to the perfect society no matter what means they use.
I was just wondering if we could hit the love thing. Or happiness thing.
I don't think they differ. So well spoken, Steve. There's Steve's lesson for the day. Love and happiness are the same thing. How do you become what is the happiest possible state that you can be in is identical to the state that you're in the highest love state you can be in. What's the highest love state you can be in? Love is relational, and it's a regard that you have for other people where you want only the good for themselves. Imagine, if you will, like John Lennon failed to adequately, everybody in this room who is so excited about the other person being happy that they pour their own happiness resources into it. Now, if they do that, here's the other point. They've got 24 people who are ecstatic when you are made happier. That is a pretty good set of relationships to be in. And you will be as happy as you can possibly be when not only you are working towards your happiness, but everybody else is so nuts about you being happy that they'll give their organs for you. That's how much they're involved in your happiness. They will give their own personal riches for you. They will give their time to you. And surprise, surprise, guess what it turns out actually makes you happier than consuming is giving. The reason it's more blessed to give than receive, by the way, isn't some weird principle. It's because genuinely speaking, at the end of the day, the happiness that you have from not just sprinkling money, but when you involve yourself in somebody's life, that kind of giving, when you involve yourself in somebody's life and you lift them up in a way to where they're happier and in love more, when you do that, show me the gift that you get that's better than that. But when everybody's just turning around and giving to each other and loving each other, that is where you will be the happiest that you can possibly be. And it's also the place where when you're not scraping for stuff, you can, by the way, develop things scientifically better, develop things research-wise better, make more discoveries because people aren't interested in, imagine somebody's got a good idea. Right now in academia, what happens if you have a good idea? You better darn well keep it quiet because somebody's going to steal it. So if you don't care about that, if you're like, yeah, I was thinking about this, and somebody else is like, I got a great way to do that, and the next thing you know, it's out of your control, and now it's working, and you don't care because it just made everybody else happier. Things will go way faster that way than they will otherwise. Thank you, Steve. Happiness and love are the same thing. Well spoken, sir.
That's something that's hard to believe in is synergy. Because when everybody in the room behaves that way, that's when 2 plus 2 equals 5. And some people say that will never, that's a human condition.
I'll quibble with the math, but the reason 2 plus 2 equals 5 is there's a law out there that people ignore, which is God said this. When you take your 2 and you add it to your 2, I'm going to actually multiply it by 2, and you're going to end up with 8. So that's the way it works.
In reality, a lot says synergy just doesn't happen.
Yeah.
Another question I have, could you say that humanism is a collective of subjective moralities?
I want to avoid the question so I can finish this point. We'll take that one up next time. That's as honest an answer as I can give. I'm going to defer the question until next time. I want to hit this point right here.
You just say yes or no.
This is why she said yes or no. This is why, or yes or not yes. Abortion is bad for mental health. This argument is very much in vain. It's not complete. It's a small sliver, but it's part of why this argument should be made. In the course of saying, what should we do for the person who's on heroin? Part of the argument is someone says heroin makes me feel good, so therefore it's good. Aren't we supposed to be talking about feeling good? And the answer is it feels good for a time, and it's bad for a longer time, and it's worse. And when you do all the math on it, it turns out that course of action takes you here on happiness, whereas the alternate course of action takes you here on happiness. So there's at least one more course of action that makes you happier. You said you're interested in being happier, therefore you should adopt this course of action. So this right here is a way of saying, if part of the reason, by the way, is this poor woman is in the most difficult of situations, and she was raped. And here's the edge case. There, people like to use or avoid depending on which side you're on. And she now has this child. Is there any reason? What's the argument for her not having the child? Well, this negatively impacts her mental health. Okay, I'll take that. What about if she has the child and sends it off for adoption or whatever else? Which one of those 5 years down the road is better for her mental health? And there will be some cases that you'll point out, and you need to argue the data wherever else, that people who have, if it's the case that ladies who've had an abortion, even victims of rape, who, what is their long-term mental health state compared to those who didn't have who were raped, didn't have an abortion, didn't take care of the kid, those who were raped, didn't have an abortion, did take care of the kid, all that kind of stuff. You might want to we ought to do the research on that. But there's a Captain America principle there, which says that part of this also has to do with societal support. I'll do this very briefly in the interest of time. Perhaps you remember me talking about a family friend who is currently a lesbian now, and the reason for her being a lesbian is that she was raped, statutorily raped, multiple times by an authority figure, and reportedly her father knew about it and didn't interfere, although I don't know the data on that, but that, 15th hand rumor. If it's the case that a person who's in that, let's say that the Christian says, for whatever reason, it's better for her happiness that she be not a lesbian than if she be a lesbian. And the argument you're going to make is towards ultimate happiness. Let's say she'd be happier in this case than she would be in that case, if that's the argument that you're making. Then one of the things that contributes to the mental state in which she was, in my opinion, this is opinion, is right now she doesn't, one of the things that she said to me is it's difficult for her to trust men. Right? Does anybody think that's an illogical conclusion on her path? Right? The two of the guys that should have treated her best took complete advantage of her and used her like a disposable commodity rather than the image of God that she truly is. Right? So she's not wrong. She shouldn't trust men. What could society have done to have helped her understand that, like, yeah, nope, you were one of the 1% or 3% or 5% that encountered those 1%, 3%, 5% wicked men, and here's how you know it's wrong, and we as a society don't buy off on it. That is to say, how can you increase your trust in men? My own opinion is, if they'd have drugged that guy out and strung him up in public, that would have gone a long way in saying where she saw those two guys, and if it were true, she saw like, okay, this group of men in the society said that's so wicked, we're going to kill him immediately, and they execute that guy. Now she's like, got it. These men, I thought men could not be protectors. Now that doesn't mean that day she turns around like, okay, it's probably all fine. Probably not, right? Hopefully not, just because that would be a quick judgment. But the way that we as society treat evil has a lot to do with how people regard evil. If we reject evil very much, then people recognize that there are two sides to society. There are people who want to do evil and there are people who want to do good. And that will polarize people into those two sides. And when one ends up in the other side, it becomes fairly obvious. And I actually think that the part of the purpose of this earth is to stretch those people, to bring the people into conflict so you know which side you're on. And at the end of the day, there will be sheep and there will be goats. And what's the way that we judge them? We don't judge them. What's the way God judges them? Based on what they do, not what they say. And that separation right there is part of what society is doing. This is what the church is supposed to be. The word holy is the word separate. It's dedicated, it's separated for a person. It's called out, it's specified. The church is supposed to be called out of the society and made this weird hippie commune, not hippie, weird commune of people who all agree what they ought to do. And the second somebody doesn't do what's right, the second the central committee chairman that takes over communism starts happening, what's the rest of the church supposed to do? Go to him as an individual, take him in front of 2 or 3 witnesses, bring him in front of the church, and toss him out of the church. Right? Where's the church with borders anymore? Where's the church with a group around that says, we are the church, the folks outside are invited to become a part of the church, but they're not a part of the church. Where's that? Doesn't happen much anymore. That's the way it seems like it's the way it's supposed to be. Right? There's supposed to be this in-group of Christians who've agreed to live their lives in this Christian society. But right now, we don't live in a Christian society. We live in a society, and we are Christians. There's supposed to be this tight Christian society. This is a Christian society. Part of what I think solid ground ought to be is not just, and occasionally we do this, but we should do this more, is whatever the individual needs are that are in here, this is the group that answers them first. Really, your family should be part of that, especially if you have a Christian family. But after your family, this is the group. You got a problem? Let's solve it. As Vanilla Ice once said. Okay.
But that was the early church.
That was the early church. How we get started on this one? By asking this question. So she's right. This is one of the things you do. Abortion is bad for mental health. You want to make this argument about happiness, and this, as I said, my answer on homosexuality, my answer on drug use, my answer on certain societal proscriptions and prescriptions, my answer on gender, my answer on adultery, my answer on boyfriend-girlfriend relationships, my answer on how you act at work. All of them have the same answer, which is, don't accuse me of being a bigot. I'm interested in that person's happiness, and I genuinely believe that the ultimate engineer, God, has specified that the right answer, the objective answer to what's going to make them happiest, is acting like this. So if I see somebody not acting like this, I'm going to tell them, I don't see you acting like this. I want you to act like this because I love you. If you don't love the homosexual, if you don't love the abortionist, if you don't love all those people, then you're a hypocrite. So you have to show them that you love them, which means you probably have to become personally involved in their life. And then you also show them that what they want is not working for their happiness. And here's what you recommend happiness. That's the answer to all of it. We'll talk with Bill's discussion next time. We're out of time, and we will continue the discussion that you're on. But that was where I was trying to get with all of this. If you're willing, let's find out what they need to do next, and if we can pitch in a hand, we can help them. If not, no worries. As long as we're out, they'll be happy. Thank you for your time. God be with you this week.
Repeat your statement. You said the way that society treats it, the way that society sees, the way that people see society treats evil.
Yes.
Da 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 da.
Yeah. How society regards evil is very, very important as to whether people will continue to accept evil or reject it. So in her case, one of the reasons that she's that way is she doesn't believe society believes that that's wrong.
So when people see that society is accepting evil, then that becomes the norm for society.
And it degrades they're like, this is evil to me. They sense like, well, society's not going to help me.
Well, the reason I ask that is I keep looking at the subjective thing and the collective subjective thing. And is it possible that a collective of subjective thing ever do?
No.
And I've come to the conclusion that no. The only counter to that I have is
Expectation is that the next
everybody.
Whether it wasn't too bad for being a little into
even though I have that ability.
besides
it's for authenticity. It's a really good source. So now it's like that's up the moon. Oh, it's really good. Yeah. We did have one. Actually, it was just one.
Like in your improved
That was gonna be dull, so that's why I read it.
Well, did you get a lot out of it?
It was interesting. I think I just like letting my brain just go through the argument